hit that. Can I just jump into it? Just do it. Cool, good. Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening. How's your day? Yeah, so, right? So thanks for coming to hang out tonight. Just jumping directly into this presentation. So I titled it Balance and Blend from the Marching Field to the Concert Stage. Just some acknowledgements before we even get into everything. First of all, Anthony Ball State, like, thanks for letting me come and hang out with you guys tonight. Much appreciated. Dr. Webb and Dr. Garrity. Dr. Webb, she, for our conducting class, we were asked, one of our tasks for the semester was to put together an article of our choosing. And for me, I've done a lot of things in regards to like marching band and so on, write an article about that, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. Dr. Garrity, you're the head honcho here, and so very much appreciate you all's time. And then all of you guys for being here. Sure, yes, there are repeating points, but it's important for me to have like situations like this. It's important for you all to be able to listen to us old graduate students talk about really fancy things. And literally just being here. Here's a real interesting story that we're all going to bond with. So when I graduated high school, like most people, we have open houses. I invited all my friends and two came. So thank you guys so much for being here for this presentation. Let's just very a little bit about myself. I'm a proud graduate of Lawrence Central High School, graduated in 2006, School Bears. Did my undergrad at the University of Louisville, Louisville, Kentucky, not Louisville. Louisville. Okay, so that, go Cards. Proud graduate of the Ohio State University. Thank you. Obviously, I'm in my second year as a doctoral student here at Ball State University. I'm very proud of that. About 10 years public school, 2 down in Kentucky, the 8 other years here in the great state of Indiana. I've had 19 years in the drum corps activity, which has been really, really lucky and fortunate for that. I spent 3 years marching with the Bluecoats. I did a year with Cincinnati Tradition in Ohio. And then I did 5 years with the Vanguard, 5 years with the Bluecoats. Would have been 5 years with the Sacramento Bears, RIP, but it's all good. Yeah, and then I have just finished up my 4th year of active adjudication and the marching band activity. So I've done some either way. I've done ISMA, I've done the Kentucky State Championships, I've done the Florida State Championships, I've been in Illinois, South Carolina, Iowa, online, all the fun things. So I'd say all that to say that I've been really fortunate and really lucky to be in the right place in the right time. I've worked really hard to get to where I am, and just have gotten some opportunities to do some really, really cool stuff. I don't take any of that for granted because all of that could very much go away, or people could just not call it whatever the case would be. So just really proud of all of those things. As far as what we're going to talk about tonight, the agenda, the first thing is we're going to talk about the outdoor soundscape, and I'll get into all those details as we go. The indoor transition, teaching strategies and rehearsal exercises for the things that we'll talk about. Philosophy beyond the notes, because what we do in education, it's not solely about notes and rhythms. It's not solely about just winning things or placing and whatnot. It's about having a long-lasting impact on the students that we have the privilege to be able to teach. And we'll conclude in questions and answers. If there are like major questions that you have as we go along, please ask. I'll do my best to be real brief with those answers, but there'll be time at the end of our time together. Okay. The purpose of this presentation. Teaching core music concepts at the beginning of your marching season helps students apply those skills throughout the year. That's a fancy way of saying, the majority of us, if we want to be band directors, the first time you will see, especially your new students, if you do not have the privilege to start those students in middle school situations, the first thing that you all do together is marching band. If you get the musical and conceptual ideas instilled in your students right away at the beginning of the season, it will make the entire school year way better for you and for your students and everybody that's involved with them. Okay, so that's a big part of this. Even though marching and concert bands look and sound different, both rely on developing a unified ensemble sound. And again, what you do in marching band has a pretty significant impact on what you do in concert band. And vice versa. You go inside and you spend the majority of your school year doing concert band things. That also has a pretty significant impact on what you're going to do the following fall. And the more that you adhere to, I say this process, but like really your fundamental process with your program, the easier your transition from one to the other is going to be throughout the course of your career. Having spent some time in the classroom, the amount of things that you can pull off of your plate in order to make your job be a little bit easier, the better. Trust me. So there's that. Now the outdoor soundscape, the very first thing we're going to talk about. Individual sound projection. On the football field, students are placed in very unique listening environments. And by that, I mean like drill forms. Okay? It's not often that you're going to put your ensemble in concert parks, as I've come to call it over time. That's just never going to happen, especially if you're in a competitive situation. Now you can, if you really feel led to do that, ask your drill writer, or if you are the drill writer, you can put your students in those forms. But it's highly unlikely that's going to be the case. And also, this is something I talk to any ensemble that I'm with when I am doing the marching band thing. The room that we play in outside, the walls are infinitely away. In this room, you can see all the walls here. So when you play, you know the sound's going to be able to bounce pretty quickly off the walls and get back to where you're at. Outside, you can't see the walls unless you're in Lucas Oil Stadium or an indoor thing. Okay? But even from that standpoint, the walls are pretty far away from where you're at on the field. Right? So just knowing that that's the case, this is something to be mindful of. You're going to have to teach your students how to play outside, okay? Which is a whole thing. You're going to have to teach your students, especially the younger ones. If you're in a situation to where you're doing marching band and you do have middle school students in that program and they're a part of what that is, you're really going to have to work very hard to ensure that those students understand what's going on. And I put this in bold because if there's anything I want you to take from this presentation tonight, it's this. It's okay to have bad sounds to help your students develop proper airflow. It is definitely okay to do that. Okay? And the reason why I say that is, in judging, especially this past season, I've done a lot of adjudication on the field. So if you're not super familiar with that, there are different categories that different people are put in when it comes to marching and marching band, I guess. So there's like your individual categories. I'm adjudicating the people as they come individually. There are ensemble categories and looking at the whole thing from a large perspective. And then there's general effect, which is like the wild card of marching band. How do I enjoy what's happening both from a visual standpoint and a music standpoint? I've done a lot of music individual. I can usually tell the groups that, and the directors and the programs that really spend time getting their kids to understand how to play outside. And the reason why you can tell that is that there still is a pretty resonant sound when they play out. Okay? I have seen and been a part of places where the directors are so keyed in on getting their students to play with a very controlled, pure sound that when you get away from it, it sounds very anemic. Okay? And that has a pretty big effect both on the large picture and also individual sounds as well. Okay? So that's just something to be very aware of. Breathing exercises, those are things that you can do to help your students understand how to move air. One thing, especially in the last, I'd say, 5 years of teaching in the pageantry arts, I've done a lot of balloon work. You can use that. You can't just use straight up the breathing gem. I'm sure we've all heard of that before. But no matter what, being able to have your students experience really good airflow helps. Being able to find what your model sound is outside, which typically that would be your principal player. Your principal player in your band usually understands what a good sound is. So you can use that person or those students as your model and then get everybody else to buy in and match what that sound is. This exercise called F around the room. It's something that's really big and popular in Texas. This is something actually with the one line that I'd ran the last few years. This is something we actually start the beginning of our spring training process with. We'll put all the students in a big giant circle and we literally hear every single member of the horn line play concert F. Okay? And ensure that we're all getting the same sounds, we're all matching the same quality of sound, and we're all playing the same lengths, things like that. And then warming up on the move. And this is something that I also am a really big advocate for. It's one thing to stand in your concert arc, or whatever the case would be, and do your long tones, lip slurs, and articulations, all the bells and whistles, but it's called marching band for a reason. Right? And there's this old adage in the activity that says that things don't count unless it's on the move. It is okay to put your students in the basics block and work on marching fundamentals and playing fundamentals. It's totally fine to do that. It's totally fine to do that on day one. It's fine to do that on the last day of your marching band season. Right? So that's something that that I'm a real big advocate for. It's something I've done in other places that I've taught, and I stand by all of that. Now, the outdoor soundscape. There are, I'm not going to say that I've coined this phrase, but something that I've been another big advocate for, especially in the last 5 years or so, are these things called performance zones. Okay, what those are, there are 3 zones. One is the quality zone. So imagine yourself on the football field, and you're looking up at the stands. If you're in a drill formation where you're standing very close to the sideline, and you're the closest person to the audience, you're in what we call, or what I've called, the quality zone. Okay, what the quality zone is that what you do is you prioritize producing the best tone quality or best quality of sound, rather than just solely playing loudly. Okay, now that doesn't mean that I'm going to get up in the front and play with a sound that's about this big. Okay, you're going to play with a full resonant sound. It just is not going to be as loud. Okay, the emphasis is going to be on the tone quality, and the biggest reason for that is me as a judge, I'm going to be able to hear all that. Okay? As you're marching around the field, I can be able to pick that apart, especially if you're in front. Okay? So there's the quality zone, there's the power zone. The power zone are the people that are furthest away from the audience or from the sideline. Those are the people who they're going to prioritize volume with their best sound and not solely just playing with their best sound. Does that idea make sense to everybody? Yeah, so you've got your quality zone that's in the front, your power zone that's in the back, and then everybody else, they're in what I call the support zone. Okay? So what you do is, depending on where in the drill formation you're at, if you're closer to the front, you're going to adhere to the rules of the quality zone, but you're playing a little stronger than people in the quality zone. If you're closer to the back, you're going to adhere to the rules of the people who are in your power zone. So there's that. They're like the chameleons of the musical ensemble. So here's some pictures when it comes to that. Hopefully you guys can see. Well, yeah, you can see. So the power zone, I put that as red. When I'm with my board line in the summer, I usually call those people like you're in the red light district. Okay? You're the people that you really can play as big as you can, and we need a lot of that support so that everybody else that's in front of you can blend their sounds backwards. Okay? Your quality zone, I put it as green light. You're the easygoing folks. Your support zone is going to be the majority of your ensemble. They're in blue. Okay, so this is from one of the shows we did last year with the absolutely awesome Pride of Mid-American Marching Band. Okay? And this is pretty easy. Now, you might be thinking, how does this work in regard to actual instrumentation? And for me, I would say, kind of doesn't matter. Now, obviously, brass are going to project at a much bigger rate than woodwind players will. Okay? But no matter what, these are different zones that you can hear inside of it. Now, what we do, especially in a collegiate setting, there's not so much like blended balance and nuance that we go after. It's more, we're trying to entertain a lot of people in a stadium. We're trying to go after the formations, and it's the entertainment value. Okay? But if I were the one that were in charge of the marching band here, that's the kind of an idea that I would get after a little bit. Okay? So that's from a collegiate setting. I'm going to show, the next thing is from, I was a band director at Homestead for a while, about 6 years or so. This is from our 2019 show. And I distinctly remember using this picture, these forms, to be able to get our ensemble to be pretty balanced. And I think I can zoom in. Yes, I can. Wow. The folks that are not highlighted, by the way, these are all color guard that's in the back. Okay, although we love them, they're not musical players, so there's that. And then we had this gigantic ramp in the back part of the field, and so the battery got shoved back there, and, they're fine. But looking at this picture, there's not too much need, so I can see these slides after tonight's presentation. but there's a mixture of woodwinds up here. There are flute players in the back line of this form are trumpet players. Okay? And then up here it's all low brass, and then we got more flutes and trumpets here, then the rest of the low brass center in the back. And so there were portions of time during these rehearsals where I would isolate, for example, like these different triangles and ensure that all of the students that were in these triangles were producing the correct volume with where they're at on the field. So things like that are highly important. So that's from an example from my high school days. This is the opening impact from the show that I taught with the Mandarins this past summer. And I'll zoom in a little bit. Of course, you can see the color guard on the outskirts. These little boxes were some of the set pieces or props, if you will, that were used throughout the show. Front ensembles up in the front. Let me zoom in through here. When we first started teaching the show, when I was with the Hornliners, as we're learning everything, I remember seeing this distinctly and thinking, okay, I know exactly who's going to be where. So the folks that are back here in the power zone were all the tubas. Okay, it looks like a trumpet and a baritone. The majority of the folks that were here in the support zone were the mellophones, most of the trumpets, and the battery. So they had some issues cutting through the horn line because we were playing so loud. And then up in the front was a mixture of a couple more mellophones, but a lot of the low brass folks. And the other thing that we would do, there we go, the other thing that we would do is we would actually warm up in this set. So there was a morning where we just so happened to have the first part of the rehearsal where I told the students to go stand in this form, and we would do our entire fundamental process here. And what that does is allow the students to be able to hear each other from an extended period of time in that exact form. And of course, we move from there to the actual show excerpt so that they can understand and get an idea of what's going on from that standpoint. Okay. One more moving forward. This also is from our ballad. You see the guard kind of interspersed around. The writer is over here hiding because they didn't play anything.
Isn't that the purpose of Thanksgiving?
It is the purpose. So yeah, here's the horn line over here, and this is a pretty unique situation. So we still have our power zone, our support zone, and our quality zone. But the tubas were all in the power zone. And the way that our drill writer wrote this was that all of the baritones were stacked one side, in the middle of the form were the mellophones, the other side were the trumpets, which for me was not ideal. That was one thing that absolutely drove me crazy because the colors of the instruments were stacked vertically rather than horizontally. So that presented some really interesting challenges. But we did it. Right? So let's see if I can do this. Let me play this excerpt. This is going to be from the ballad from our show this past summer. I think it's that World Championships. All right, so yeah, we'll go from here to the end of the ballad. So just check this out and get an idea of what this all sounds like in real time. This is our last performance of summer. Yeah, so one, I'm really proud of what the horn line did. That just, again, I said it created some really interesting challenges, and I can't tell you how much time we spent trying to get that thing to be as balanced as it possibly could be. There are personal things that I wish could have been a little bit better on that run, but you can even see here, this is, ooh, look at that laser pointer. So tubas in the back, right, tubas in the back, low brass up front, we got our mids here, and we have our highs here, okay, which will lead me into kind of our next part of the presentation. Tubas being the bass, baritones being your tenor voices, allophones being your alto voices, trumpets being your soprano voices. So we're done with that. The pyramid of sound. How many of you guys have ever heard the concept of pyramid of sound? Fantastic. How many of you guys know where the pyramid of sound comes from? All right, right. So the pyramid of sound, it's a concept that was introduced by this gentleman. His name is W. Francis McBeth. How many of you guys have ever heard of that name before? Okay, a couple of people. He wrote a lot of music. He was a conductor as well. That's his beautiful picture. So it was introduced out of this book that he wrote called Effective Performance of Band Literature. He wrote it in 1972. And what he called it, even inside of this book, he called it the double pyramid balance system, which I think some people said that they didn't want to say all 4 words, so they just want to say 3. But that was the change in what he wrote. Okay, but really what comes out of this, the meaning of what he came up with was the lower the voice line, the louder the volume. Now it's not so one of those things, well, I'm a tuba player, so I'm just going to play as loud as I possibly can at all times. It's not about that, okay? It just means that there, in theory, every note that the ensemble plays, you should hear, for the most part, the bass voice a little louder than the tenors, a little louder than altos and sopranos. Okay? And this was the exact diagram that he used inside of this book. The exact diagram. And it goes back to what I was just talking about when we had looked at that little excerpt from the Mandarins. So 4 different voice parts, which leads into choral study. Okay? So you have your soprano voices, your alto voices, tenor voices, and bass voices. And even here, Macbeth broke down the pyramid or the actual voice parts in relation to the different subsections inside of an ensemble. At the top, you get your clarinets, first clarinets, first cornets, flute solos, and E-flat clarinets. Okay, just because the tessiture that those instruments play in theory, is pretty high. Okay? Then your alto voices, your second, third clarinets, your second, third cornets, which way back in the day, cornets were the thing. Okay? Yes, there were trumpets that existed, obviously. Okay, but more people wanted to go after the cornet sound because that tone color is a little rounder than it would be for your typical trumpet instrument. Your tenor voices, first trombones, horns, which that's something that I think over the course of time, the horns really get pushed up into the alto world. So this, for me, when I went back and actually found this book, this was the first time I'd ever seen a horn be put into this category. Okay. Same thing with alto saxes too. Typically, alto saxophone goes with the alto voice part. Interesting. First trombones, alto clarinets, which still exist, of course, but usually most folks don't tend to go towards those instruments. And then same thing with the tenor sax, fits inside of the tenor voice part. Okay. And then your bass voices, your second, third trombones, tubas, baritone horns, which of course you all should know, a baritone and a euphonium are 2 different instruments. Right? They're 2 different instruments. Most people use them interchangeably, but don't do that. And then your bassoons, bass clarinets, and baritone saxes. Those make up your bass voices. And those are split into 4 different groups like you see here. And then getting more into the weeds with this, also 2 different diagrams that are inside of Macbeth's book. He breaks down the actual bass, or not bass, but brass family, and also the woodwind family, as in regards to like order of importance. And you can see over here the graph that's on the other side of these triangles or these pyramids, and how he stacks it and how this relates into the volume and order of importance with the ensemble. Okay, so that's your typical pyramid of sound, which for me, I buy into the majority of the time. Okay? And the reason why I say that is you can create different colors with the ensemble. I'm an advocate of that. Okay? There are colleagues of mine and people that I respect around the country that say that every single note of every piece that's ever been written, whether it's a whatever, all the way up until 2025 should always be inside the pyramid sound, which that's great. You're going to get a very specific color from your ensemble. And these percentages, I know it's a little small, but I'll explain. So the pyramid sound, what I have grown up in, the school of thought that I've grown up in, is if you have an ensemble sound that is 100%, 40% of that volume should be your bass voices, 30 should be your tenor voices, 20 should be your altos, and a little sprinkled 10% on top should be your soprano voices. A lot of that has to do with the frequency of the instruments. Low frequencies don't carry as far as high frequencies. So you need more of that. You have to be able to balance that in order to get a true ensemble sound. Right? Now, again, I say it like that is a very specific color. I do also advocate for this as well. What I have called the upside down pyramid. You know, shout out to Stranger Things that's coming up in a few weeks. So all you do is you literally just flip it. Right? You can flip this. Your soprano voices get 40% of the sound. Your altos get 30. Your tenors get 20. And your bass voices get 10. If you're playing something likely by John Mackey, or if you're playing the consummate piece called Away Day, Away Day by Adam Borg, if you're doing like a Blue Shades or aspects of Blue Shades by Frank Ticheli, anything that's got some sort of pop or something that needs to be more in your face, you're probably going to go after this. It's going to make your ensemble sound a little bright. There's nothing wrong with that. Some of the upper volumes that we use with the horn line at the Mandarins, we tend to make a little bit brighter because it's a little bit more in your face. It's a little bit grittier, and that's okay at times. If you want that to be the case all the time, cool. Just ensure that your ensemble produces the best quality of sounds to the back of it. Okay, so there's that. The other thing that I typically use outside is also this. This is a cylindrical sound, which means that every single voice part, every person on the field is equal percentage in the total ensemble sound. So your soprano, alto, tenor, and bass voices get 20% of that ensemble sound. Okay? And I usually will start there on day one of marching or day one of drum corps, just to ensure that everybody's speaking the same language, everybody's participating at the same rate. And then from there, I will dial it back and move and adjust and this, that, and the third. Okay? So these are 3 different types of sounds that I advocate for, and 3 different types of sounds that I tend to encourage and coach my ensembles to produce. And you get, like I was saying, you get some really interesting and cool timbres and colors from the ensemble. That depending on where you're at in your show, will really help the mood and the character of the music that you're trying to play. Okay? You could say, yo, I do not agree with that at all. Cool, that's between you and Jesus. Right? But I like this. Okay? I like this, and I advocate for these. And we'll continue to do that until somebody tells me I need to. Okay? Next part, the indoor transition. Returning to playing indoors for the rest of the school year should be used as a reset. And what I mean is, we're not doing marching band anymore. We're not going to the Macy's or the Rose Parade or whatever it is. We are done playing outside for the rest of the school year. I'm going to bring all of my students inside and go back to square one. Let's do some breathing exercises. Let's do some concert Fs. Let's just ensure that we're all playing with the correct sound inside. But obviously we're going to scale things back because we can see the walls in the room. Okay? It's a lot more about resonance when we get inside. Okay? Acoustic sensitivity, it's usually the biggest one. And I'll say this because I work here. When I was teaching at Homestead, it was one of those things where we would come back inside and then it was immediately into basketball time. And so it was a lot of like, just play softer. No, that's too loud. Play softer. There wasn't a lot of educational support that went after the don't play as loud because we're playing inside type thing. Okay? But being aware of where you're at inside, the acoustic sensitivity is something that's important. Dynamic discipline as well. Okay? Outside triple forte versus inside triple forte are pretty drastically different. Typically, if we're playing triple forte inside, that probably would be outside like a good mezzo forte, minus. Because again, we're going after resonance, we're going after true quality of sound, brilliance and purity of tone, and things like that. Okay? And then also that reset leads us to experimenting with color and texture as well. And this also applies to your percussion students as well. Okay, this is not solely just woodwind and brass related. And I put this in bold. Do not shy away from revisiting the same fundamental process that you use outside when you're playing inside. Don't shy away from that. Because in theory, if you have things set up the way that you want to, you should be able to plug and play. If you're doing an 8-count tone exercise outside, it's the same 8-count tone exercise that you would use inside. You go after the exact same fundamentals, you're going to have the exact same sound. And it's just not going to be as loud or as present inside as you do outside as well. Okay? And then the last thing, because you are inside and we don't have the distraction of the trees and people pulling in and out of the parking lot and folks talking and flags going up and down in the air and somebody falling and things like that. Because you don't have those distractions, you have to be really creative in how you help your students develop their musicianship and their ears. You gotta be really, really creative with that. Okay? Teaching strategies and rehearsal exercises. Let's see, revisiting your fundamental process is critical in the first few days when you're back inside. That's what I was just saying on the slide before. Okay? That stuff is very, very critical. You could use a chorale, or using a chorale can be efficient to helping your students be able to recalibrate quickly. Okay? And this is something that both my colleague Reed, we've used this, and we think we used this before we both in the beginning here. But there's a set, Aaron Cole, 36 chorales for band. For all you people that are about to go teach, or something you just want some resources, you need to keep that like in your brain. It's a free resource. There are 36 whole chorales. Okay, this is one of them. Okay, I know both Reed and I use this extensively with Canvas. Okay? This is number 7 of the 36 chorales for band. The Old 100th. The thing that's really unique about this resource is that every student has at their part looks exactly like this. There's a soprano part, there's an alto part, there's a tenor part, there's a bass part. You can straight up go through and define who is your soprano voices, your alto voices, tenor voices, bass voices. You can use it in Beth. You could do whatever you want to do. If you want to have the euphoniums playing the soprano part because you want to balance the ensemble that way, by all means, go for it. You're not going to be like, oh, I want the flutes and the tubas to play the soprano. You would only do that as a means to just create a different color, but that's not going to be your default, obviously. Okay, but every single voice part has a soprano, alto, tenor, and a bass line. I like using these, and especially at the beginning part of our process inside, I will put everybody on the soprano part, because then that forces every single person in every subsection to not only listen to the other players that are in their section, but listen across the ensemble. I can balance the ensemble. I could say this next repetition, I want the alto saxes to be the predominant color in the ensemble, and insist that everybody else puts their sound inside of the alto sax voice, or the oboes, or the flutes, or the euphoniums, whatever the case may be. That kind of goes into that whole be creative thing. Okay? So that's what an exercise or a resource like this comes into play. I love these things. I wish he made like multiple volumes of this and have more chorales. Okay, but even the 36 that are in the set, they're all absolutely fantastic. And the cool thing about it is that the further in that you go, I know there's a chorale that's based off of the Chaconne from Holst's First Suite. There is one, Horkstone Grange from Posey. He wrote a chorale on that. There are, I think, 2 Bach chorales, but he really shies away from that and pulls it from actual literature. So there's that. And in bold, again, don't rush your students through this process. Do not rush your students through this process. It is critical to get really good sounds inside, and then you go to play your basketball game, or you do your chamber thing, or you do your solo ensemble stuff, or your winter concert, or whatever the heck is that comes after that. But it's really important to do the reset first, and then you go from there. Okay, not just, oh my gosh, we have a basketball game in 3 days, so I gotta learn 8 charts and just rah. Okay? Because then all you're gonna do is you're gonna chase the tail for the rest of the school year. And then you go outside and you're really not gonna start with the best foot that you typically would be. Okay? So there's that. Score mapping. So this is something I remember being introduced to when I was a drum major in high school. Okay, what score mapping is, It's a play on the pyramid sound, okay? And it prioritizes the order of importance in music. And that's not to say that the soprano voice always gets the melody, so they're the most important. Sometimes the melody might be in your bass sound, it might be in your tenor voice, whatever the case may be. But what it does is it puts the priority on that. Okay? And what you do is you use a series of colors. Now, I've seen different people use different colors for different ways, okay? But the way that I remember this was that the melody, what you would do is you would highlight the entire melody in yellow. Right? Your counter melody, you put that in orange. Any of your harmonic voices, you put that in pink. And then, of course, because we can't forget about our friends in the back of the room that hit stuff, you put those folks in green. Okay, so using the chorale, this is an aspect of a way that you can do this. So here, I'd say this is what number 26, the Salvations created. For me, the way that I interpret this chorale is that your alto voices have the melody at the very beginning, and then the melody transfers over to your soprano voices. It gets really unique here at measure 10 because the alto voice is now split. So some people, if they're playing the upper part of the alto voice, they're now kind of doubled with melody. And then the other folks are playing one of those harmonic ones. Okay? I interpret that the tenor voice at the very beginning are the folks that have the counter melody. And then that transfers throughout. Once you get to measure 6, the alto and the tenor voice, they're like pairs inside of that, so on and so forth. Okay? If you're to use this, and you can actually use this in your score study process, you would go through and do all of this for every single note of the piece. And I remember my high school band directors going through millions and millions of highlighters, marking up every note of every piece that we played in any of the concert ensembles that I played in too. Okay? So that is another way to do this. You can also do this and display this for your students. So if you are talking about going in balance, you can say, hey, where is the melody or who has a melody in measure 7? Or who has the harmonic voice in measure 12? Things like that. You can actually show this and have your students see that color coordinated idea, and then that's a visual reference for them to be able to change their playing or to make the ensemble sound the way that you have decided that you want your ensemble to sound as well. So it's called score mapping. It's an idea that you can use. It does take time, just like any aspect of score study will. It takes time, but it's another unique way to be able to have your ensemble blend and balance when you're inside. Okay, so seating awareness. Okay? What I mean by that, row swaps, and I'm sure you guys have heard of this before. But essentially what you do is you can have your concert ensemble be set up whatever way that you determine. And then from there you can say, hey, I want all the trumpets, instead of sitting in the middle to the back of the ensemble, set in the front. And flute players, go to where the trumpets are at. Or tubas, you're way over here. Why don't you go sit where the clarinets are at? Does that idea make sense? So you're just taking whole sections and moving them around. I know this is one thing when I was teaching, I would have my students just say, I'm going to give you 15 seconds. I want you to sit anywhere inside the ensemble setting, okay? But you can't sit next to an instrument that's just like yours. And of course, it seemed like they all loved it because there was a whole bunch of noise and commotion. And typically what happens is anybody that's in front always goes to the back. Anybody that's in the back always goes to the front. So you got like tuba, oboe, horn, clarinet, bells, and like whatever the case may be. Cool, let's play chorale number 7. And while we're playing chorale number 7, I want you to put your sound inside the tenor voice. Again, I'm experimenting with the color and giving them an opportunity to be in a situation where they're not, where they typically are not, and then we create and rehearse and tweak things from there. Okay? Circle seating. Okay? What that is you take your entire ensemble, you put them all in a big giant circle. Everybody's facing towards the front, and you go from there. Okay? I like using that at any point in time in when I was teaching public school. When we're in the middle of our concert cycle or whatever the next big performance that we're playing in, it puts the students in a different environment. You can do this in like sections, and you can split everybody apart. Of course, once you isolate students, if you have a flute and a trumpet and a euphonium and a saxophone, obviously like you're isolating those students, and it really puts them on an island, which is necessary because you really want to get into the weeds and make sure that everybody's producing the things that they need to. But yeah, that's another way to be able to do that. So this is one of the ensembles that I had at Homestead, and don't mind this big gap in the middle. Okay? I kind of like that because then those students I can be able to from a behavior standpoint, I can see them. Okay. Well, what I would do from here, like you can see all the flute players up here, I would take these flute players and stick them back here where the trumpets are. Okay. For these trombone players, I would take them and put them over here with the clarinets, things like that. That's an aspect of what you can do in regards to flipping your ensemble, this idea of like seating awareness as well. Recording and playback, which is also really, really important. An example that you could do, say chorale number 7 was the chorale that you wanted to use throughout the school year, okay, both for marching band and for concert band. Okay, what you would do, and this is thinking far ahead, record the chorale outside at the end of the season. Don't do it at the beginning because it will sound probably really rough. Okay? But at the end of the season, record that chorale. Okay? So that could be October, November. And then in March, record the exact same chorale with your ensemble. If you have multiple concert bands, do it for all of them, 2, 3, 4, wherever it is that you're at. Once you do that, you listen to it, and then you can ask your students some of these types of questions. For example, what do you notice about the balance of the ensemble? How does the blend differ from outside to inside? Are the tones close to matching? Do we all sound the same? Do all the clarinet players sound the same? Do all the tuba players sound the same? You know, and then from here, like, what do you notice about the intonation? In theory, hopefully to God, we're playing a relatively close to in tune in both situations. Obviously, if you're in Indiana and it's October, it's probably going to be a little rough because it's 12 degrees outside and it just snowed and the polar vortex and all those things like that. But you can ask your students those questions, and it's critical to put your students in a situation so where they're analyzing what it is that they're doing. You can be in a situation where you are driving the bus and you tell your students, well, this is out of tune and that's not together, blah, blah, blah. Your students aren't going to learn anything, though. They're not going to be able to take that information and really apply it. But if you're asking those students those questions, if you're putting them in a situation to where they're thinking critically about their performance, they're going to be able to hear that, okay, and it's going to be able to make the overall concept of sound that you're trying to create a lot more concrete, okay, a lot more solidified. Okay. And then the other thing with recording and playback, use some sort of, or using quality recording equipment can improve the process. The great thing about phones nowadays, especially like cell phones, the video quality and the audio quality is pretty daggone high, and you don't have to buy anything. Of course, you can go and buy your fancy recorders and things like that. There's Zoom recorders. I got one in my backpack that I typically use when we're in Surza. Okay? If I'm with an ensemble and I really want to get into the weeds, I'll go and listen to that. Sony has one. DJI, that's a brand that I found a couple of years ago. I love the stuff that DJI puts out. This is like they're wearing my suit. It's a little gimbal thing that I have there, okay? But DJI, yeah, it still is actually pretty affordable, especially if you have a big board job. But you can use things like that to record your ensemble. When you do that, okay, be sure to get as far back and as far high as you can. So if you're outside, don't stand in front of your students and go, okay, everybody play, because you're going to get Jacob sound. Well, Jacob sounds great, but I don't want to hear just Jacob sound. Okay? I want to hear Ryan. I want to hear Reed. I want to hear Gonzalo's clarinet. Okay? I want to hear all the things. So I'm going to get as far back as I possibly can, okay, and as high as I possibly can. If you're in a situation where you have a really nice auditorium, go somewhere in the middle of the auditorium. Okay? If you have the opportunity where you're in a football stadium, you get to rehearse a lot, go to the top of the press box. You go inside the press box, be outside, because there's going to be a better listening environment for you as well. Okay? Now, the philosophy beyond the notes. Okay? Item number 1, balance and blend also shapes ensemble culture, not just the sound. What I mean by that is you being able to establish a standard for how your ensemble sounds. If you can get your students to buy into that, Okay, that's a calling card for your program. And the program that I tend to look to as in regard to like what that influence is, were my former colleagues down there at Carmel. Okay, you can go anywhere in the country, and everybody knows exactly what Carmel sounds like, but the philosophy behind how they create those sounds work. When I started at Homestead, we had our own sound. I personally was not a huge fan of the way we sounded when I first got there. By the time that I left, it was a lot closer to me, to where I think we actually sounded like a true ensemble. You hear all the different colors and whatnot. It sounded like us, but we still had that. Right? But that's an aspect of that. We want to be able to have really good culture, and not just one of those, we sound great, but we don't know how we get to that state. Okay? Item number 2, the continuity between these settings lies in the fact that both require an awareness of others. If you can get your students to be aware of the other tones and sounds in the room or on the field, it's a great thing. It's not one of those where they're solely thinking about themselves or anything like that. Okay? And then for me, item number 3, directors who emphasize these connections empower students to succeed in both settings. Because that's really, at the end of the day, that's what you want. You want to be a person that develops lifelong lovers of music, not just somebody who likes marching in a lot. Okay? You want people to enjoy every aspect of music, because in theory, what you want is you want those students to leave the program and maybe be a music major, maybe playing in a community ensemble, maybe they get lucky enough to be able to have a family and then they have kids, and you want those kids to be a part of the program so that you're creating a bigger opportunity for all of us that teach music to have better job security, if we're going to be real honest with stuff like that. Okay? And then also have large programs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, starting to wrap things up, the items that were not covered in this presentation, and also addressing some of the elephants in the room. Number 1, the use of electronics outdoors. The clip that I played from the Mandarins, the reason why personally I love that a lot, there was not one person on that ensemble, that was mic'd. And that's a pretty significant aspect, controversial. We can talk later over a cup of Gatorade on what I feel about that, because I like both sides of the fence, but there wasn't one person in that war line that was mic'd. And the reason why that's such a big thing is that I've judged ensembles where they'll go and put mics on different students, or they'll have a bajillion mics on their front sideline, and think that that's the means of being able to create volume or loud moments or things like that. We didn't do that. And so the power zone thing and be able to get true blend and balance, that was all acoustic. So I love stuff like that, and I take a lot of pride in things like that. Should you mic your students or not, it's totally your call. When I was a part of the staff at the Blue Coats, we felt like we mic'd everything and the grass all the time. That's just the thing that they went about doing. Were they successful at it? Heck yeah, they are. Do I agree with it? But that's what it is. Right? The other thing is how to develop your actual fundamental process. I didn't go and say, and for 5 minutes you're going to do breathing, and for the next 10 minutes you're going to play a long tone, and for the next 10 minutes you're going to play. We can do that in this. Now, if you're one of those that's like, I've never done this before, how would you go about doing it? Personally, yeah, I can sit down and walk you through things that I think would help, but that all depends on where it is that you end up teaching, okay? And what your rehearsal schedule is like. When I was at Homestead, we rehearsed every day of the week. When I was teaching at Whiteland, we rehearsed 3 days a week. When I was down in Kentucky at North Hardin, we did 4, but one of those was a sectional day. So very, very different situations. And every school that I was at, we figured out a way to be able to make that work. Drum corps, you might think, okay, well, yeah, those people will get away for the entire summer. They're with each other all the time. Rehearsal time is very limited, even in the summer. Okay, because you got to deal with props and staging, and somebody's got to throw a flag, and we got to do this thing, and there's a change in the show. The bus broke down. The showers don't work. Things like that, which are all very real things. Okay. Now this is where it gets into kind of addressing the elephant in the room. Understanding that what we talked about in this presentation will make you sound like whatever high school marching band. Okay, that's not what I'm advocating for here. This is not. This is how you sound like Flower Mound High School. Or this is how you sound like Hebron High School. They have their own way of doing things. Every ensemble has their own color. It's the same thing in the drum corps world too. Like your Carolina Crown doesn't sound like the Bluecoats, which doesn't sound like Phantom Regiment, which doesn't sound like Boston, which doesn't sound like the Mandarins, which doesn't sound like the Blue Stars, which doesn't sound like Spirit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I'm not advocating for here. I'm giving you tools to be able to make your ensemble sound like the way that you want it to sound. You've come with a game plan prior to your first rehearsal, and you know the vision of where it is that you're going. And then the other thing that's being very real is understanding that not everyone has access to the same resources. You know, I even at Homestead, which is really affluent, okay? We didn't have the same resources that our friends down there at Carlinville, or my friends over at Wando High School in South Carolina. They'd be very different resources where, you know, you can have a large staff, or you can have facilities or instruments or access to whatever. Like, that's not the case, you know. And it's very rare to find a gig and to be able to walk into your first gig and have stuff like that. Some people get lucky. Some communities can develop into that. I've seen communities that have developed out of what that is. And so understanding that that's the case are things that are also important. Okay? And this is where, if you guys have any questions, if you don't, I'll keep it pushing. You know, but are there any other things that you guys might have questions about that I didn't talk about in this presentation? Yeah.
So you talked about how like the zones and whatnot. So how would that work for a much smaller band? Because you showed a lot of bigger bands. So how would that work for a smaller band?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, like, how do the performance with zones work for the smaller ensembles? You just take everything and truncate it a lot. You know, and what you would do is you would make hybrid zones too. So, say if you have one of my first teaching gigs ever was down in Louisville at this school called Seneca High School. There were 33 people total in the marching band. Okay, and I think we had, if I remember correctly, I think there were either 15 or 17 wind players. What I would do from that standpoint is you have your highs, your soprano and alto voices, and then you have your lows, your tenor and bass voices. Okay, just about everybody's going to be in the quality zone. Okay? You're not going to worry an ensemble. I can't believe I'm going to use this word, but a horn line of 17 kids or 15 kids, a wind section of that. There's no power zone. They need to play with their best sound. Okay, and if all the students play with their best sound, you'll get rewarded you'll get rewarded from that, from an adjudication standpoint. But really, outside of that, the musical product is going to be a lot closer to what it is that you want. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. So, and I'm glad you asked that. Like, yeah, a lot of what we talked about were like really big schools. You can do the same thing for smaller schools. You can do the same thing in a show band situation. Right? This is not solely, I'm a BOA band, and here we go, it's not all about that. Right? You can do the same thing in your show group. You can do the same thing, even if you have a band, and these groups do exist, if you just play football games. And you can put your students in form. If you teach at America High School, you go and put them in letter A and then balance from there. Stuff like that. So, any other questions? Thank you for asking. Anything? Yeah.
So this is a little bit in the weeds of the fundamental stuff, but like where do you draw the line for like breathing exercises stuff? Because it's kind of, there's a lot of conflicting opinions about like what's too much and what's enough to get these kids to use air.
It's a good question. So what I would usually do, I would spend more time at the beginning of our time together as an ensemble in regards to breathing. So we might do maybe 15 to 20 minutes of different aspects of breathing. So there might be just simple flow studies, in for 4 counts and out for 4 counts. There's some power breathing. I don't do a ton with that because I don't want to destroy my kids. But I got to get them used to the speed of air that they need in order to be able to play at a bigger volume. So 20, 30 minutes, but you have to break it up that way. As we get towards the end of our season, there's probably going to be a lot less time with that. Just, are we moving there the right way? Okay, let's do a couple power breathing things, 5 minutes, and then we're back into it. Another thing I do, and this kind of goes into the creative part of it, in order to break things up, one thing at the Mandarins that we used to do a lot with breathing, with any of the mouthpiece work, I would use this music. Some Kendrick Lamar, I would use some Snarky Puppy, I would use Hiatus Coyote, like just anything that wasn't a metronome, so that they get used to moving air or moving their feet, or doing some like just straight up mouthpiece work to actual music in itself. So one, it just breaks things up. So it's not just dimensional, but two, it forces them to, there's a pulse, and I have to move my body or my ear to that pulse before I actually get on my instrument itself and I do the marching. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else? Yeah.
So, I know a lot of like big programs, they have multiple middle schools that feed into a program, and often marching band is the first time you're meeting those students, and with their difference in programs, they have difference in tone quality, difference in fundamentals and how they learn things. How do you like take those differences in understanding and really create your own process with their difference in backgrounds?
That's a good question. So the first thing that I would do is try to see if you can get into those middle schools well before the marching band time starts. Right? I would say that I was really lucky, especially at Homestead. Every part of our day we had to go to the middle schools. Right? So Piper, I remember day one, we were together. It was really cool. I mean, I wish I had got that. That would have been really cool times. But like, we started together. So by the time that Piper and everybody that was in Piper's class got to the high school, they knew all the verbiage that I was going to use, the way that I rehearsed, all those things like that to help. So if you can do that, great. If you're not able to, or you're in a situation where your middle school, that director or that team of directors just don't want you to be there, which is fine. Just wait till they get there. Plan like a marching band day or welcome to band day, something like that. So you can get all the students in the same space, and then start very slow. Here's how we stand, and here's how you make your sound, and that's it. And have maybe a couple of those days before the actual school year is over. And then when you get everybody together, do the exact same thing all over again. Here's how we stand, here's how we do this and that, here's how we mark time, yada, yada, yada. And then from there, you go forward. Right? But the key is to try to see if you can get in there early. And if you can't, which is fine, just plan those days throughout the year, or throughout the back half of the semester. So, good questions. Anybody else? Anything else? Yeah.
You talked about the concept of like a pyramid of sound and like the 40, 30, 20, 10%. Obviously when you like stand in front of like a band of any sort and listen to it, you can't be like, oh, I hear 10% trumpet in this. Like that's not something we can like pick out. So what kind of like timbre or like tone differences are you listening for to try to achieve like the kinds of balances that you talked about?
That's a good question. So for me, it's not necessarily the timbre or the tone. Everybody, no matter what, needs to make a good sound, period, right? But what I would do, literally, it's just like, don't play as loud, and experiment with that. Just be very general, especially with, like 8th graders, freshmen, a kid that's 13, 14 years old. They're not going to be able to get that, but they can get, oh, maybe I should play a little louder here. Maybe I should play a little bit softer here. That's one way you can do it. The other way that I found some success is start with your older kids first. So your juniors and your seniors, because they've been with you for a while, and they can be able to grasp onto those concepts. Start there, and then get everybody to play inside of that, and then futz around from there. Okay? But you bring up a good point. Like all those percentages, like you can't go and flutes. 9.5% of sound, like that's just not. It's not a thing, right? But you have to. I think from that point, you have to be a really good musician and say, okay, a little less here, a little less there, and go from there. I like visual concepts, so for me, it's like a soundboard. I can go to the soundboard and fade this down and fade this up and whatnot. That's kind of the for me, that's the way I took the bounce from there. Good question. Anything else? Anybody else? Word. Okay. So again, my final thought, there are a lot of words up here, but really like marching band and concert band, they operate in different worlds, but the concepts of blend and balance really are the exact same thing. They are the exact same thing. When you're outside, it's a lot more, the focus is more on clarity and projection and musical and visual alignment. When you're inside, it's more nuance, it's more listening, it's more tone color. That doesn't mean that you can't get nuance outside. And that doesn't mean that you can't get vertical alignment inside. Right? They're all interchangeable, okay? And it's really important to ensure that that's the case. But when directors make these shifts explicit, pair them with purposeful rehearsal strategies, students can gain more than technical ability. They gain awareness and adaptability of being a true musician. Okay? Which again, at the end of the day, that's the thing that we want to create. Yes, we want them to be better people, all those like philosophical things outside of just playing notes and rhythms. But we also want them to be the best musicians that they possibly can be, so that when they leave, they go, I really appreciated being in the program with Mr. or Miss so-and-so. And I want to continue doing that because it had such a profound impact on me that I want to have that a part of my life, whether I'm playing or I'm going to a concert or I'm supporting X, Y, Z, or whatever the case may be. That's what we want. It's not about winning things, although it's cool to win. I've done it, and I've won all the things. I got the trophies and the rings, and they're collecting dust in drawers. And I've done all that. And what I care about is that any person I've been in front of, that they want to continue, or they want to get their friends to be a part of it too. That means a lot more to me. So thank you. It's my email, Brian Warfield, music@gmail. I put my Instagram up there because I like sharing real quick music or like funny things that I found. I found a reel today of Marshawn Lynch conducting the Houston Symphony. That was hilarious. But yeah, like if any questions, right there.
Before all of you go, I just want to say one thing, because this was awesome. So thank you, Brian, for doing all this. I just want to make sure that you heard something that Brian said, okay? Because there's a hidden curriculum thing here that I want you to make sure that you know, because you are all entering into a profession right now that is completely and utterly in transition mode, okay? And not just transition mode, but transitory mode. Music teachers are leaving places in the middle of school years, okay? It is not like any other time in music education I've ever seen in my life. If you want to build these kinds of sounds, blend, balance, and all that kind of sound that's going to create your sound, you got to stay in one place. You can't chase job after job after job and say, oh, Carmel has a better sounding band, I want to work there. Avon has a better sounding band, I want to work there. Stay in one place. Take what you learned here, take what you learned from Brian, and build your own in one place. Your communities will love you for it. Thanks, bye.
Hey guys, really quickly, if you did not sign into the